Far Cry 4 Map Editor Tutorial. Just going to cover some of the basics here. Check out the options. Check out the different types. Doesn't really matter what type you choose initially. You can always change it later. It's pretty much the same thing that you're greeted with. It's a big empty map. So over the years I've spent hundreds of hours in Far Cry map editors, in Far Cry 1, 2, 3 and 4, mostly in 2. I recreated levels from Resident Evil, bits of Silent Hill, Fallout 3, Doom and real world places such as Chichen Itza's pyramids. Here's the options. Most of them are personal preference. You can obviously turn off the fog and water, enabling you to see hidden items on the map that would normally be hidden by the water or fog. Keep objects with terrain is an important option because that will sometimes make objects float above the terrain, and if you like to or want to sink objects into the terrain, then you might want to turn that option off. So the controls differ from Far Cry 2 in that in Far Cry 2 you had a two-dimensional mode which made the camera hover above the landscape. It did make it a bit easier to place static objects in the landscape. So the map editor here has two different forms of landscape editing. One is the mesh you see here before you, which you can alter with these brushes here. You can raise it and lower it, so forth. The other is objects. You can get large objects such as cliffs, but if you do use large object cliffs, try and put some landscape behind them to make sure they're completely opaque and no light comes through them and objects behind them aren't rendered when you're not looking at them. Now, here the default landscape is set to a height of 50. If I raise it to 51, you can see just one square on the grid rises. So that's useful if you want to be really mathematically accurate and calculate your levels that way. For this tutorial at least, I'll be using pretty much an analog make it on the fly method. So the first thing I'm going to do is rise the entire terrain up. In Far Cry 2 there was a certain level of the water that you set the water to, and any terrain that dipped under that would then be underwater, but in this editor you can place water in the individual squares. You may want to pay attention to the squares on the grid here, especially the pink ones, because they represent the object grid. The object grid restricts the amount of objects that you can place in any one of these squares. So if you max that out, you've got to move to the next square to be able to place more objects in the map. Now when rising the landscape with a controller, bear in mind the trigger's analog, so if you squeeze the trigger slowly, it will only affect the landscape slowly up to, with the height tool, a maximum height, which is whatever you have set the height. In this case 200. I'm just going to go into the level now and view it. Come back and watch the next video.